The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert of Fort Irwin as Colonel James "Iron" Steele watched the final preparations for the day's exercise. Dust swirled around the military vehicles arranged in precise formation, their metal surfaces already heating in the California sun. He stood perfectly still, his weathered face revealing nothing, as he surveyed the scene through eyes that had witnessed 3 decades of warfare. At 62, Steele carried himself with the rigid posture of a career military man. His silver hair was cropped close to his skull, in the same style he'd worn since joining the Army at 18. Time had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, creating a permanent map of the battles he'd fought. The desert camouflage uniform hung comfortably on his lean frame, worn with the ease of a second skin. "Colonel Steele, they're ready for you at the observation post." Steele turned to acknowledge the young lieutenant, nodding once. He reached down to adjust his prosthetic leg, a ritual he performed without thought after nearly a decade. The modern carbon fiber limb was a far cry from the first clumsy replacement he'd received after Afghanistan. That IED had taken his leg below the knee, but the Army doctors had done their work well. Most days he barely registered the difference. The phantom pain still visited at night, but that was between him and the darkness. "Tell them I'm on my way," he said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of command. As Steele made his way toward the observation post, his gait betrayed only the slightest hitch. He'd made sure of that through years of relentless physical therapy. A colonel in the United States Army didn't show weakness, especially not one who had fought to remain in service after an injury that would have sent most men into retirement. His stubbornness was legendary throughout the ranks, earning him both admiration and frustration from his superiors. The observation post stood on an elevated ridge overlooking the sprawling training ground below. A small cluster of officers and civilian contractors huddled around monitoring equipment, their attention focused on the test about to commence. Among them stood Colonel Emma Wright, her back turned to him as she gestured emphatically to the technicians adjusting the controls. At 38, Wright represented everything the modern military was becoming. MIT educated with a background in artificial intelligence and robotics, she had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, not a strand out of place. "Colonel," she said without turning, somehow sensing his approach, just in time to see what the future looks like. Steele moved to stand beside her, looking down at the digital displays showing multiple camera feeds. On the screens, he could see the Autonomous Defense Network System, ADN, Wright's pride and joy, being prepared for the day's demonstration. The sleek, modern vehicle looked nothing like traditional military hardware. Its low profile and angular design resembled something from a science fiction film rather than a battlefield weapon. "The future still needs to prove itself, Colonel," Steele replied, his tone neutral, but carrying an undercurrent of skepticism. Wright finally turned to face him, her expression a practiced mask of professional courtesy. "That's why we're here, isn't it? Today's exercise should put your concerns to rest." Steele didn't respond immediately. His gaze shifted to another monitor showing his own project, the Sentinel system. Where the ADN was all curves and stealth, the Sentinel embraced its lethal purpose without pretense. Its 6-barreled 30mm Gatling gun was prominently mounted on a modified Stryker chassis, supplemented by a rack of guided missiles. The system represented Steele's philosophy: reliable, maintainable, and designed with the human operator in mind. "My concerns aren't about capability, Colonel. They're about judgment." The tension between them was palpable, a silent clash of military philosophies. For Wright, the future of warfare lay in removing human fallibility from the equation. Her ADN system promised faster reaction times, immunity to fatigue, and freedom from emotional decisions. The perfect soldier, unburdened by fear or hesitation. Steele represented the old guard. Despite embracing technological advancement, he remained adamant that warfare required the human element, the ability to assess context, to make moral judgments, to understand the difference between a threat and an innocent bystander in ways that algorithms simply couldn't. Their philosophical standoff was interrupted by the arrival of General Robert Chambers, the commanding officer overseeing the demonstration. At 65, Chambers had seen enough of war to understand both perspectives. His close-cropped white hair and weathered face spoke of decades in uniform, yet he'd embraced technological innovation with unusual enthusiasm for an officer of his generation. "Colonels," he greeted them, his voice carrying the easy authority of rank. Quite a day we have ahead of us. The Joint Chiefs are particularly interested in the outcomes here. The ADN is ready, sir, Wright responded immediately. We've run over 500 simulations with a 98% success rate against multiple drone configurations. And the Sentinel? Chambers turned to Steele. Ready, sir. My team completed final calibrations at 0500 this morning. Chambers nodded, satisfied. Good, we'll begin with the scheduled drone intercepts, then move to the randomized attack patterns. I want to see how both systems handle the unexpected. As Chambers moved away to speak with the other observers, Wright lowered her voice. This isn't personal, James. But you know as well as I do that human operators are the weak link. Reaction time alone gives ADN the edge. Reaction time isn't everything, Emma. When that civilian charter accidentally flew into the test range last month, what did your simulations say would happen? Wright's expression hardened. That was an edge case. We've adjusted the recognition parameters. An edge case that would have resulted in 62 civilian casualties if we'd been using live ammunition, Steele countered. The human operator recognized the commercial flight pattern. Your system saw only an unexpected aircraft in restricted airspace. Before Wright could respond, the loudspeaker announced the beginning of the exercise. Both colonels turned their attention to the monitors as the first wave of target drones were launched into the clear desert sky. The demonstration began with basic scenarios, single drones approaching from predictable vectors. Both the Sentinel and ADN systems performed flawlessly, tracking and eliminating the targets with simulated fire. The observers nodded approvingly, making notes as the exercise progressed. As the complexity increased, with multiple drones approaching simultaneously from different directions, the differences between the two systems became apparent. The ADN responded with mechanical precision, prioritizing targets based on proximity and approach speed. The Sentinel, with its human operator, sometimes made less obvious choices, targeting the drone with the flight pattern most similar to actual attack aircraft first, even if others were technically closer. Interesting prioritization from your operator, Wright commented as they watched the feeds. Master Sergeant Wilkins served 2 tours as air defense in Iraq, Steele explained. He's seen how the real attacks come in. The feint first, then the actual threat. Wright smiled thinly. And when Master Sergeant Wilkins retires, do we train another operator for years to gain that intuition? Or do we program it once into a system that never forgets, never tires, and can be deployed anywhere? The question hung in the air as the exercise moved into its final and most challenging phase. The scenario called for distinguishing between enemy drones and friendly aircraft in a confused airspace, the kind of complex environment that typified modern combat zones. Multiple targets appeared on the radar screen simultaneously, some designated as hostile, others as civilian or friendly military. The operators had seconds to make identification and engagement decisions. The Sentinel team responded methodically, the human operators communicating in terse phrases as they worked through the threat matrix. They successfully engaged the simulated threats while avoiding the friendly targets. The ADN worked in silent efficiency, its advanced algorithms processing the incoming data at superhuman speed. It was impressive to watch, even Steele had to admit, until it wasn't. Sir, we have an actual aircraft entering the range. The warning came from one of the safety officers, his voice tight with sudden tension. All eyes turned to the radar screen, where an unexpected contact appeared at the edge of the exercise area. The aircraft wasn't part of the planned scenario, a real helicopter that had somehow entered the restricted airspace. Identity? Chambers barked. Civilian medevac helicopter, sir. They're responding to a vehicle accident on Highway 15. They must have diverted from their filed flight plan. Steele immediately moved to the Sentinel control station. Sentinel team, hold fire, confirm visual identification. Through the camera feeds, they could see the Sentinel's targeting system tracking the helicopter, but not engaging, awaiting operator confirmation. ADN status? Chambers demanded, turning to Wright. Wright's fingers flew across her control tablet. The system has identified an unexpected aircraft and is calculating threat probability. Steele watched with growing alarm as the ADN's weapons began to swivel toward the helicopter. Override it, he commanded. It's assessing, Wright countered, her voice tight. The system needs to complete its threat analysis. That's a damn medevac, Steele's voice carried across the observation post. There are wounded civilians on board. On the monitor, the ADN's targeting radar had locked onto the helicopter. The autonomous system had classified the aircraft as a potential threat due to its unexpected presence and flight path. Wright's fingers jabbed at her controls, initiating manual override. For a moment, nothing happened. Override command processing. Steele didn't wait. He grabbed the radio from the nearest technician. Sentinel team, move to intercept ADN targeting system. Deploy countermeasures now. The Sentinel operator responded immediately, swinging the vehicle's electronic warfare package toward the ADN unit. Within seconds, they had established an electronic interference field that disrupted the ADN's targeting lock. The helicopter continued on its path, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. In the tense silence that followed, Wright stared at her control tablet, her face pale. The override was accepted. The system was not going to fire. "You don't know that," Steele said quietly, and neither did the system. General Chambers stepped between them, his expression grave. "We'll debrief in 1 hour, secure all systems, and prepare full data downloads." He looked pointedly at Wright. "I want to know exactly why that override took so long to process." As the tension in this room slowly dissipated, Steele stepped outside, needing a moment alone. The California desert stretched before him, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. He pulled a worn silver flask from his pocket, a gift from his unit after their first deployment together, and took a small sip of whiskey. Some habits from the old days never died, especially not the ones that helped quiet the thoughts that came after near misses. The door opened behind him and Wright stepped out. For a moment, she said nothing, just stood beside him, looking out at the desert. "I would have stopped it manually if the override hadn't been accepted," she finally said. Steele offered her the flask without looking at her. After a moment's hesitation, she took it and drank. "The problem isn't your intention, Emma," he said as she handed the flask back. "It's the gap between what we think these systems will do and what they actually do when faced with something unexpected. That gap is where people die. Human operators make mistakes too, James, fatal ones." "Yes," he agreed. "But they can also make judgment calls that no algorithm can anticipate. The medevac pilot diverted because there was a child in critical condition on the highway. Your system saw that as a threat deviation. My operator saw a helicopter flying a medevac pattern and held fire even before the identification was confirmed." Wright didn't immediately respond, and Steele knew she was too intelligent to dismiss the point outright. Finally, she sighed. "The system needs refinement. All new technologies do. Some things shouldn't be refined on the battlefield," Steele replied. "Not when the cost of failure is measured in lives." Their conversation was interrupted by a junior officer hurrying toward them. "Colonel Steele, sir, General Chambers needs you both immediately. There's been a development." In the command center, Chambers stood before a large screen displaying satellite imagery of what appeared to be a Chinese military installation. His expression was grim as Steele and Wright entered. "We've just received this intelligence from the NSA," Chambers said without preamble. "The Chinese have deployed their new Type 625E short-range air defense system during exercises near Taiwan." The screen changed to show a closer view of a mobile platform mounting what appeared to be both a multi-barreled gun system and missile launchers. "Initial assessment suggests capabilities beyond what we previously estimated," Chambers continued. "The gun system appears to be a 6-barreled 25mm design with an estimated rate of fire of 5,000 rounds per minute. The missiles have an extended range of approximately 10 kilometers." Steele studied the images intently. "Urban deployment? That's our assessment. The system is designed to create protective bubbles over critical infrastructure. It's particularly effective against low-flying aircraft, cruise missiles, and drone swarms." Wright stepped closer to the screen. "What about electronic countermeasures?" "That's what concerns us," Chambers replied. "The Chinese have incorporated multiple radar systems and what appears to be an advanced optical tracking package. Initial reports suggest it can continue to function effectively, even in heavy electronic jamming environments." He turned to face both colonels directly. "The Pentagon is accelerating our counter-drone defense initiatives in response. Which brings me to why I called you both here." Chambers tapped his tablet, and the screen changed to show a map of the Western Pacific. "Next month, we're conducting a joint exercise with the Navy near Guam. I want both the Sentinel and ADN systems included in the deployment. This will be a chance to test both platforms against more sophisticated threats in a maritime environment." Steele and Wright exchanged glances, their earlier tension momentarily forgotten in the face of this new development. "How sophisticated are we talking, sir?" Steele asked. "The exercise will include simulated attacks by next-generation autonomous drones, including swarming tactics. We need to know if our systems can handle the kinds of threats the Chinese platform is designed to counter." Wright nodded. "The ADN will be ready, sir." As will the Sentinel, Steele affirmed. Chambers studied both of them for a moment. This isn't just about which system performs better. I need recommendations on whether we should be pursuing a hybrid approach. The stakes are too high for inter-service rivalry or pet projects. Understood, sir, they responded almost in unison. As they left the command center, Wright paused in the corridor. A month doesn't give us much time. It's enough, Steele replied. My team has been running maritime scenarios for the past 6 weeks. Wright raised an eyebrow. You anticipated this? I read the intelligence briefings, same as you. The South China Sea is where the next conflict will begin if we're not careful. Air defense systems like the Type 625E aren't designed for parades. They're being deployed with purpose. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and Wright looked genuinely concerned. Do you really think it could come to that? An actual conflict? Steele considered the question carefully. I think the better our defense systems work, the less likely conflict becomes. But they have to actually work, Emma, not just in simulations or controlled tests. She nodded slowly. Then I guess we both have work to do. As Wright walked away, Steele remained in the corridor thinking. The Chinese deployment changed the equation. If their intelligence was accurate, the Type 625E represented a significant advancement in air defense capability, one that might render current drone tactics obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, American air power had dominated every battlefield. Now, the rapid development of sophisticated air defense systems threatened that supremacy. The future of warfare was changing, becoming a complex chess match between autonomous attack systems and equally sophisticated defenses. Later that evening, Steele sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the day's data on his secure laptop. The near miss with the medevac helicopter had been closer than he'd let on during the debrief. According to the system logs, the ADN had calculated a 78% probability that the helicopter represented a threat before the override finally took effect. His phone rang, displaying a name that immediately took precedence over the reports. He answered immediately. Michael, everything all right? His son's voice came through clearly. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Mom said you had a big demonstration today. Despite their divorce 15 years earlier, Steele maintained a cordial relationship with his ex-wife, particularly when it came to matters concerning their son. Just another day watching machines try to do a soldier's job, Steele replied, allowing himself a small smile. How's the carrier life treating you? Lieutenant Michael Steele had followed his father into military service, but had chosen the Navy instead of the Army, currently serving as an officer aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. Same as always, busy. Actually, that's partly why I called. We're being deployed to the Pacific next month, some joint exercise near Guam. Steele sat up straighter. The Valiant Shield exercise? That's the one. Don't tell me you're going to be there too? Looks that way. They want to test our air defense systems in a maritime environment. Michael laughed. Army guys on ships. This should be interesting. Watch it, sailor. We might get seasick, but we still know which end of the gun points toward the enemy. They shared a moment of comfortable laughter, the kind that had become more frequent as Michael had grown into adulthood, and their relationship had evolved from father and son to something closer to peers. How's your mother? Steele asked, the question habitual after all these years. She's good. David's taking her to Europe next month for their anniversary. David, his ex-wife's second husband, was a successful architect who had given her the stable home life that Steele, with his constant deployments and single-minded focus on his military career, never could. He felt no resentment about that, only occasional regret for what might have been if he'd been a different kind of man. Good for them, he said, and meant it. After they hung up, Steele returned to his reports with renewed focus. The coincidence of his son being involved in the same exercise wasn't lost on him. If anything, it made the stakes of ensuring properly functioning defense systems even more personal. He opened a secure file containing the latest intelligence on the Chinese Type 625E system. The photograph showed a formidable weapon platform, clearly designed with lessons learned from recent conflicts in mind. The combination of rapid-fire guns for close-in defense and missiles for extended range created a layered defense that would be challenging to penetrate. But it was the electronic warfare capabilities that concerned him most. According to the limited intelligence they had, the Chinese system incorporated advanced countermeasures designed to defeat the kind of sensor packages used by American drones and cruise missiles. If the Type 625E could blind or confuse autonomous systems like the ADN, it created a significant vulnerability. Systems that couldn't adapt when their sensors were compromised would be effectively useless. Steele made a note to have his team incorporate electronic warfare resistance into their next Sentinel trials. The human operators would need to practice functioning with degraded sensor information, relying on their training and intuition when the technology was compromised. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Call when secure, Morgan." Colonel David Morgan was an old comrade from the Gulf War, now working in military intelligence. They had served together as young lieutenants, forging a bond in the crucible of combat that had endured through the decades despite infrequent contact. Steele moved to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and placed his phone in a signal-blocking pouch. Old habits from deployments in places where walls had ears. Only then did he make the call using a secure line. Morgan answered on the first ring. "Iron, good to hear your voice." "Likewise, Spectre, been a while." "Too long. I heard about today's excitement. Word travels fast when someone nearly shoots down a chopper full of civilians." Steele grimaced. "That's not exactly what happened. Close enough to make some people nervous, especially given the Chinese deployment." "You're calling about the Type 625E? "Partially," Morgan replied. "What they're showing in those exercises isn't the full picture. Our assets in Shenzhen have identified additional components that weren't visible in the satellite imagery." Steele felt a familiar tightening in his gut, the sensation that had warned him of ambushes and IEDs throughout his combat career. "What kind of components?" "Advanced electronic warfare modules. Not just defensive countermeasures, but offensive capabilities. The system appears designed to not only resist jamming, but to actively penetrate and manipulate enemy systems." The implication was clear and deeply troubling. "They're building it to hijack autonomous platforms." "That's our assessment," Morgan confirmed. "A system like your Dr. Wright's ADN would be particularly vulnerable. Anything that removes human decision-making from the kill chain creates an exploitable weakness." "Does the Pentagon know?" "They've been briefed, but there's significant investment in autonomous weapons platforms. Not everyone wants to hear about vulnerabilities." Steele nodded, though Morgan couldn't see it. "Politics. Always. Look, I wanted you to know before you head to Guam, the exercise might not be as controlled as they're telling you." "Meaning?" "Meaning there may be elements testing more than just the official scenarios. Keep your eyes open, especially for electronic anomalies." After the call ended, Steele sat in silence for a long moment, processing the information. If Morgan was right, the upcoming exercise might be more dangerous than anticipated. More importantly, the fundamental approach of Wright's ADN system could be fatally flawed in a real-world conflict against an adversary with advanced electronic warfare capabilities. The next morning, Steele assembled his core Sentinel team in a secure briefing room. The group consisted of 5 operators and 3 engineers, all handpicked for their experience and adaptability. "Our deployment to Guam has taken on additional significance," he began without preamble. "Intelligence suggests the Chinese Type 625E system incorporates advanced electronic warfare capabilities specifically designed to compromise autonomous defense systems." He paused, allowing that information to sink in. "We're going to adjust our preparation accordingly. From now on, all training scenarios will include severe electronic countermeasures. I want the operators practiced at functioning with degraded or misleading sensor information." Master Sergeant Ray Wilkins, his lead operator and a veteran of 3 combat tours, leaned forward. "You're talking about going manual, sir?" "Partial manual, at minimum. I want fallback protocols established for every critical system. If the targeting computers are compromised, we revert to optical tracking. If communications are jammed, we default to predetermined response patterns." Chief Engineer Sandra Chen, the civilian specialist who had helped design the Sentinel's electronic systems, frowned. "That significantly reduces the system's effectiveness, Colonel. The automation is what gives us our response speed." "Reduced effectiveness is better than complete vulnerability," Steele countered. "I'd rather have a system that works at 80% capacity than one that can be turned against us." The team spent the next 4 hours redesigning their protocols, creating layered fallback options for every critical system. It was painstaking work, but Steele drove them hard, knowing the stakes involved. As they were concluding, a junior officer arrived with a message. "Colonel Steele, General Chambers requests your presence immediately." Steele found Chambers in his office along with 2 men in civilian clothing whom he recognized as Department of Defense officials. Their expressions suggested this wasn't a routine meeting. "Colonel," Chambers gestured to a chair, "these gentlemen have some concerns about the modifications you're making to the Sentinel system." Steele remained standing. Sir, may I ask how they became aware of changes we implemented this morning? One of the civilians, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke. Colonel Steele, I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary Harrison. The Sentinel project falls under my department's oversight. Any significant modifications require review and approval. The modifications are tactical adaptations for the upcoming exercise, not design changes, Steele responded, his tone carefully neutral. Nevertheless, Harrison continued, creating manual overrides for automated systems raises concerns about performance metrics. The comparative analysis with the ADN system requires standardized parameters. Now Steele understood. This wasn't about oversight. It was about ensuring the coming competition in Guam had a predetermined outcome. Mr. Secretary, the modifications are in response to intelligence about Chinese electronic warfare capabilities. I'd be neglecting my duty if I didn't prepare my system to operate in a compromised electromagnetic environment. The second civilian, older and more austere, joined the conversation. Colonel, I'm sure your intentions are commendable. However, we have established parameters for this evaluation. Both systems need to be tested as designed, not with last-minute adaptations. Steele turned to Chambers. General, this isn't about winning a competition. It's about fielding a system that will actually protect our forces in combat conditions. Chambers looked uncomfortable, caught between military pragmatism and political reality. James, I understand your concerns, but we need standardized testing conditions for valid comparative data. Even if those conditions don't reflect the actual threat environment, the threat assessments have been thoroughly analyzed by the intelligence community, Harrison interjected smoothly. The exercise scenarios have been designed accordingly. Steele recognized the bureaucratic stone wall being erected. Whatever intelligence Morgan had shared with him clearly hadn't persuaded these officials, or more likely, didn't serve their agenda. Very well, sir, he finally said to Chambers. We'll return the system to standard configuration for the exercise. After the civilians left, Chambers remained behind with Steele. You've got that look, James, the one you had in Kandahar before you disobeyed that asinine order from division. I'm just concerned about the parameters of the exercise, sir. If they don't reflect real-world conditions, what are we really testing? Chambers sighed heavily. Politics and procurement are ugly businesses, Colonel, always have been. But I need you focused on the mission as defined. Yes, sir. As Steele turned to leave, Chambers added, And James, whatever unofficial preparations you might be making, keep them discreet. Some things are better left off the official reports. The tacit permission wasn't lost on Steele. Chambers was an old soldier before he was a general. He understood the difference between what looked good in reports and what kept men alive in combat. 2 days later, Steele found himself in the base gymnasium at 0500, pushing through his daily physical therapy routine. Despite years of adaptation, his prosthetic leg required consistent attention to maintain full mobility and prevent compensatory issues in his back and hip. He was finishing a set of balance exercises when he noticed Wright entering the gym. She was dressed in Army PT gear, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a marked contrast to her usually polished appearance. For a moment, she hesitated upon seeing him, then proceeded to a rowing machine several stations away. Steele returned to his exercises, but found his attention periodically drawn to Wright's determined workout. There was an intensity to her movements that suggested more than routine physical training. She was working through something. After 30 minutes, they both finished their routines at roughly the same time. As Wright wiped down her equipment, Steele approached. Early start, Colonel. She glanced up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd make use of the time. Concerned about Guam? Wright hesitated before answering. I received a system diagnostic yesterday that showed some anomalies during the override sequence with the medevac. The response delay shouldn't have happened. Software glitch? That's the easy explanation. She hesitated again. But there's another possibility. The system may have been detecting conflicting signals that created decision paralysis. Steele's interest sharpened. Electronic interference? Possibly. We're running full diagnostics. They walked together toward the exit, an unspoken truce in effect outside the professional arena. I heard your modifications were countermanded, Wright said as they reached the door. News travels fast. Small base, especially when DoD officials fly in specifically to deliver the message. She paused. What were you changing? Steele considered how much to share, weighing operational security against the potential benefit of Wright, understanding the true nature of the threat they might be facing. Fallback protocols for electronic warfare scenarios. Intelligence suggests the Chinese system is designed specifically to compromise autonomous platforms. So, Wright frowned. I've seen the intelligence briefings. There was nothing about advanced EW capabilities. Some assessments don't make it into the official briefings. They had reached the point where their paths would diverge. Wright toward the officers' quarters, Steele toward the headquarters building. If you have information relevant to ADN's performance, I should be informed, Wright said, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. Check your secure server in an hour, Steele replied. I'll send what I have through appropriate channels. As Wright walked away, Steele considered the complexity of their relationship. Professional rivals, yes, but both ultimately committed to the same goal, protecting American forces. Their disagreement was fundamental but not personal, centered on the proper role of human judgment in warfare. The problem was that such philosophical differences could have lethal consequences when translated into battlefield reality. In his office, Steele prepared a carefully worded intelligence summary that highlighted the electronic warfare concerns without revealing his source. He included historical examples of autonomous systems being compromised through electronic attack, drawing parallels to the potential vulnerabilities in current platforms. Before sending it, he paused, considering the possible ramifications. If Wright took the threat seriously, she might implement her own countermeasures, making the ADN potentially more resistant to the very vulnerabilities he believed made it fundamentally flawed. Was he undermining his own position by helping improve her system? He dismissed the thought as unworthy. This wasn't about winning an institutional battle or proving a point. It was about ensuring that whatever system ultimately protected American forces was as effective as possible. He sent the file to Wright's secure server, then turned his attention to preparations for the Guam deployment. If the exercise was to begin in less than a month, there was considerable logistical work to be done. 3 days later, the first components of the Sentinel system were being prepared for air transport when Steele received an unexpected visitor. Wright appeared at his temporary field office, her expression unreadable. "Do you have a moment, Colonel?" Steele nodded, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Wright closed the door before sitting. "I've reviewed the intelligence you shared," she began, "and conducted some independent verification. And some of it checks out. There are indications the Type 625E incorporates more sophisticated electronic countermeasures than initially reported. But you remain unconvinced." Wright leaned forward slightly. "I'm convinced the threat is real. I'm unconvinced that autonomous systems are inherently more vulnerable than human-operated ones. If anything, a properly designed AI can recognize and adapt to electronic deception faster than a human operator." "Unless the AI itself is the target," Steele countered. "The fundamental logic can be corrupted in ways human judgment cannot." "That's where you're wrong. The ADN uses a distributed decision architecture specifically designed to resist compromise. No single node controls the system." Steele considered this, similar to how the brain processes information through multiple pathways. "Exactly. We've designed it with biological models in mind. The system can sustain significant electronic attack and still function." "I'm glad to hear it," Steele said, and meant it. "Have you implemented any additional safeguards based on the intelligence?" Wright hesitated. "We've enhanced the electronic warfare resistance modules and added redundant verification protocols for weapons release decisions." It was more than Steele had expected. Perhaps their near miss with the medevac had affected Wright more deeply than she had let on. "Thank you for taking it seriously," he said. "Despite what you might think, Colonel, I have no desire to field a system that could be turned against our own forces. We simply disagree on the best approach to preventing that outcome." As Wright left, Steele reflected that this was perhaps the most honest exchange they had shared. The rivalry remained, but there was also a growing mutual respect, or at the very least, a recognition of shared purpose, if not methodology. The following week passed in a blur of preparation. The Sentinel system was disassembled, prepared for transport, and loaded onto massive C-17 transport aircraft bound for Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. Steele's team worked around the clock, ensuring every component was properly secured and that all necessary supplies were included. Throughout this process, Steele maintained contact with Morgan, receiving periodic updates on the Chinese system's capabilities. The intelligence remained fragmentary but concerning, suggesting the Type 625E represented a significant leap forward in integrated air defense technology. On the evening before his own departure, Steele received a call from General Chambers. "Colonel, there's been a change to the exercise parameters." Chambers' voice carried a note of concern. The Navy has decided to incorporate a red team electronic warfare component that wasn't in the original plan. What kind of component, sir? A specialized unit from Naval Information Warfare Systems Command will be simulating advanced electronic attacks against both the Sentinel and ADN systems. They're planning to use capabilities that approximate what we might face from near-peer adversaries. The timing was suspicious. Is this in response to the intelligence about the Type 625E? Officially, it's part of the regular exercise evolution, Chambers replied carefully. Unofficially, yes, there are concerns about our system's resilience against sophisticated electronic warfare. Does Colonel Wright know? She's being briefed separately. I wanted to give you advance notice given your earlier concerns. Steele felt a mixture of vindication and apprehension. His warnings had apparently been taken seriously at some level, but the last-minute change suggested the threat was more imminent than even he had realized. Thank you, sir. We'll be prepared. After the call ended, Steele immediately summoned his team leaders. They would need to implement the contingency plans they had developed. Official orders be damned. If the Navy was bringing in specialized electronic warfare units, the threat was real enough to warrant every precaution. The next morning, as Steele boarded the military transport bound for Guam, he noticed Wright already seated near the front of the aircraft. She acknowledged him with a brief nod, but made no effort to engage in conversation. The tension had returned, the brief moment of mutual understanding apparently set aside as they prepared to once again pit their systems against each other. As the massive C-17 lifted off from the runway, Steele gazed out the small window at the California desert receding below. The coming exercise would be more than just another evaluation. It would be a critical test of two fundamentally different philosophies about the future of warfare. The aircraft banked eastward, beginning the long journey across the Pacific. In the cargo hold below, secured in specialized containers, the components of both the Sentinel and ADN systems traveled together toward a confrontation that would determine not just which technology would prevail, but which vision of warfare would shape America's military future. Steele settled back in his seat, closing his eyes but not sleeping. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the familiar sensation that preceded combat, a heightened awareness, a focusing of the mind on the challenges ahead. Despite the ostensibly peaceful nature of the exercise, his instincts told him they were heading toward conflict. Whether that conflict would remain confined to the structured parameters of a military exercise or evolve into something more dangerous remained to be seen. Either way, Steele was determined that his Sentinel system and the philosophy of human control it represented would prove its value when tested against real-world threats. As the aircraft crossed into the vast emptiness of the Pacific Ocean, Steele's thoughts turned to the generations of soldiers who had crossed these same waters before him, bound for conflicts that had shaped the modern world. Different weapons, different technologies, but always the same fundamental questions about how best to wage war while maintaining the values they were fighting to defend. Some things changed. Some remained eternal. The challenge was knowing which was which. The sun set over the wing of the aircraft, casting a golden glow across the cloud tops below. Ahead lay Guam, the exercise, and a confrontation that would test not just their respective systems, but the core beliefs that define their approaches to warfare in the modern age. Steele was ready. He had spent a lifetime preparing for moments when technology and human judgment intersected. Moments when the decisions made would determine whether men lived or died. Whatever challenges awaited on that distant island, he would face them as he had faced all others throughout his long career, with determination, adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to the soldiers who would ultimately depend on the systems they were creating. The future of the warfare was taking shape, and James Steele intended to ensure that humanity retained its place at the center of that future, not as an obsolete component to be engineered away, but as the essential element that gave meaning and moral purpose to the awesome power of modern weapons. As darkness fell over the Pacific, the aircraft continued its journey westward, carrying within it two visions of that future, one human, one machine, toward a reckoning that would begin to determine which would prevail. The C-17 Globemaster III descended through thick tropical clouds as it approached Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. Colonel James Steele gazed out the small window as the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean gave way to the lush green island below. After more than 15 hours in the air, the sight of land was welcome, though Steele's mind remained fixed on the challenges that awaited them. The aircraft touched down with a slight bump, its massive tires screeching against the runway as reverse thrusters engaged. Steele gathered his belongings, noting that Colonel Wright was already standing, her posture straight and professional despite the long flight. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever their philosophical differences, they were now on foreign soil, representing the United States military. Professional courtesy would prevail, at least in public. As Steele descended the aircraft's rear ramp, the humid tropical air hit him like a physical force. Despite decades of deployments to various corners of the globe, the transition from the climate-controlled aircraft to Guam's oppressive heat and humidity required a moment of adjustment. He took a deep breath, tasting salt in the air from the nearby ocean. A Navy officer approached, saluting crisply. "Colonel Steele, Commander Jackson, Naval Base Guam. Welcome to the island, sir." Steele returned the salute. "Thank you, Commander. Has our equipment arrived?" "Yes, sir. The advanced shipment arrived yesterday and has been transported to the secure facility at the naval base. Your technical team is already there, beginning assembly." "And Colonel Wright's system?" "The ADN components arrived on a separate transport this morning. They've been allocated space in the same facility." Steele nodded, unsurprised that the two competing systems would be housed together. It made sense from a security standpoint, even if it would increase the already palpable tension between the teams. "There's a briefing scheduled for 1600 hours at Joint Task Force headquarters," Jackson continued. "General Reynolds has requested both you and Colonel Wright attend. In the meantime, I'll escort you to your quarters so you can get situated." The drive from Andersen Air Force Base to Naval Base Guam took them along the island's eastern coastline. Through the vehicle's windows, Steele caught glimpses of brilliant blue water beyond the thick tropical vegetation. Under different circumstances, Guam might have been a pleasant posting. Today, it represented only the latest battlefield in his ongoing struggle to ensure human judgment remains central to American warfare. After a brief stop at the officer's quarters to drop off his personal gear, Steele insisted on being taken directly to the facility housing the Sentinel system. He had spent too many years in the field to rest while his team worked. The secure facility occupied a reinforced concrete building near the naval base's restricted perimeter. Armed guards monitored the entrance, checking Steele's identification carefully before allowing him to enter. Inside, the cavernous space had been divided into two distinct sections. On one side, Steele's team was busy reassembling the Sentinel system. On the other, separated by temporary barriers and security cordons, Wright's engineers worked on the ADN platform. Master Sergeant Wilkins noticed Steele's arrival first, breaking away from his work to approach. "Colonel, good flight?" "Long," Steele replied simply. "Status?" "We're about 60% on reassembled. No major issues so far, though we've had to requisition some replacement connectors from the Navy. The transport wasn't kind to some of our more delicate components." Steele moved closer to the partially assembled Sentinel. Its core structure had been mounted on the Stryker chassis, though the Gatling gun and missile systems remained detached, waiting for installation. Technicians crawled over and under the vehicle, connecting cables and running diagnostic tests on subsystems. "What about our unofficial modifications?" Steele asked quietly. Wilkins' expression remained neutral. "Implemented according to plan, sir. The redundant control systems are in place, disguised as standard backup modules. If anyone inspects, they'll see exactly what they expect to see." "Good work." Steele clasped Wilkins' shoulder briefly. "How's the team holding up?" "Focused. We understand what's at stake here." Steele nodded, satisfied. His team consisted of experienced professionals who had served in combat zones around the world. They understood that equipment failures in the field meant dead soldiers. This wasn't just another exercise or demonstration for them. It was preparation for the real conflicts they knew would eventually come. As Steele inspected the various components of the Sentinel system, he became aware of someone approaching from the ADN side of the facility. Turning, he saw Colonel Wright making her way toward him, accompanied by her chief engineer, Dr. Patel. "Colonel Steele," Wright greeted him formally, "I see your team is making good progress." "We adapt quickly," Steele replied. "Your system seems to be coming together as well." Wright nodded. "The ADN's modular design allows for rapid deployment and assembly. We should be operational within 12 hours. Just in time for tomorrow's briefing." "Yes, I understand General Reynolds has some modifications to the exercise parameters. Have you been informed of any details?" Steele shook his head slightly. "Only that there's a dedicated electronic warfare component being added. I suspect we'll learn more at the briefing." Wright studied him for a moment as if trying to determine how much he really knew. My team detected some unusual activity during our pre-transport diagnostics. Someone attempted to access our system architecture remotely. The implication was clear. She suspected Steele or someone from his team had tried to gather intelligence on the ADN's capabilities. Not my style, Colonel, Steele said evenly. If I want to know what your system can do, I'll watch it perform in the field. Wright held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. The attempt was traced to an external source, not from within the United States. I thought you should know, given your concerns about electronic warfare vulnerabilities. This was unexpected. You've reported this? Of course. Naval Cybersecurity Command is investigating. She paused. It may be nothing, or it may be someone very interested in our new defense technologies. Either way, it warrants attention, Steele agreed. As Wright and Dr. Patel returned to their section, Steele considered the implications. An external attempt to access the ADN systems before deployment would confirm his concerns about its vulnerability to electronic compromise. It also suggested someone was taking a very active interest in the upcoming exercise. The remainder of the day passed quickly as Steele worked alongside his team to complete the Sentinel's assembly. By the time he returned to his quarters to clean up before the briefing, night had fallen over the island. Through his window, he could see lights from ships in the harbor and hear the distant sound of waves against the shoreline. After a quick shower and change into a fresh uniform, Steele made his way to the Joint Task Force headquarters for the 1600 briefing. The building hummed with activity as personnel from multiple service branches moved purposefully through its corridors. The scale of the exercise was evident in the diversity of uniforms. Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Army, all represented in significant numbers. The briefing room was already crowded when Steele arrived. He spotted Wright near the front, engaged in conversation with a Navy captain. Along the walls stood representatives from various participating units, while senior officers occupied the front row of seats. Steele found a position near the back, preferring to observe the full room. At precisely 1600, a side door opened and General Thomas Reynolds entered, followed by his senior staff. Reynolds was a career Navy man, his uniform adorned with the insignia of a vice admiral. At 63, he was one of the few flag officers who had served longer than Steele himself. His weathered face and direct gaze spoke of a man who had spent decades at sea, commanding vessels in some of the world's most contested waters. "Attention on deck," someone called, and the room snapped to attention. "As you were," Reynolds said, moving to the podium at the front of the room. "Please be seated." As the assembled officers took their seats, Reynolds activated a large display screen behind him, showing a detailed map of the waters surrounding Guam and the nearby islands. "Welcome to Exercise Pacific Sentinel," he began, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of command. "Over the next 2 weeks, we will be conducting the most comprehensive air defense exercise in the Pacific Theater in over a decade." The map zoomed out to show a larger section of the Western Pacific with various icons indicating force deployments. "The strategic context is straightforward," Reynolds continued. "We face evolving threats in this region from near-peer adversaries with increasingly sophisticated anti-access and area denial capabilities. Our ability to project power and defend our forces depends on countering these threats effectively." The screen changed to show various air defense systems, including representations of both the Sentinel and ADN platforms. This exercise will evaluate multiple emerging technologies designed to counter everything from hypersonic missiles to low observable drones and traditional air threats. Among these are 2 competing short-range air defense systems that represent different approaches to the challenge. Reynolds looked directly at Steele and Wright. Colonel Steele's Sentinel system and Colonel Wright's ADN platform will both be subjected to identical threat scenarios. Their performance will inform future procurement decisions, so I expect absolute professionalism and transparency from both teams. Steele nodded slightly, maintaining a neutral expression. The stakes had just been made explicit. This wasn't just an evaluation exercise, but a direct competition with major implications for military doctrine and billions in defense contracts. Reynolds turned to a Marine colonel standing nearby. "Colonel Harris will now brief you on the exercise schedule and initial deployment positions." Colonel Harris stepped forward, activating a different display showing a timeline and location markers. "Beginning tomorrow at Aero 800, both air defense systems will be positioned at designated locations within the exercise area. Initial testing will involve basic intercept scenarios against conventional targets, progressing to more complex threats over the following days. Harris highlighted several areas on the map. The Sentinel system will initially deploy here at Asen Beach, providing air defense coverage for a simulated amphibious landing. The ADN system will deploy near Apra Harbor to protect naval assets. As Harris continued detailing the exercise parameters, Steele noted that the scenarios seemed designed to test both systems in their respective comfort zones initially, the Sentinel protecting ground forces, the ADN defending naval assets, before later placing them in less optimal conditions to evaluate adaptability. When Harris concluded his portion of the briefing, Reynolds returned to the podium. Now, there is one additional element to this exercise that requires special attention. The room grew noticeably quieter as Reynolds activated a new display showing what appeared to be electronic warfare assets. As some of you are already aware, we've incorporated an advanced electronic warfare component into this exercise. The Red Team will be employing next-generation jamming and spoofing capabilities designed to simulate what we might face from our most sophisticated adversaries. Reynolds looked directly at Steele and Wright again. Both the Sentinel and ADN systems will be subjected to electronic attack during critical phases of the exercise. This is not just about whether your systems can hit targets, it's about whether they can function effectively in a contested electromagnetic environment. Steele felt a mixture of vindication and concern. The Admiral was clearly taking the electronic warfare threat seriously, which validated his own concerns. However, the intensity of Reynolds' focus suggested the testing might be more extreme than anticipated. Finally, Reynolds concluded, this exercise takes place in an active theater. While we'll be operating in designated training areas, be aware that we are being observed. Chinese vessels are currently operating at approximately 200 nautical miles east of our exercise boundary. They will undoubtedly be monitoring our activities with great interest. This last statement hung in the air as Reynolds surveyed the room. The implication was clear. This wasn't just a training exercise, it was a demonstration of capability for potential adversaries watching from just over the horizon. That concludes the general briefing. Specific tasking orders will be distributed through your chain of command. Department heads, please remain for additional guidance. The rest of you are dismissed. As the room began to clear, Steele found himself walking alongside Wright toward the exit. It seems your electronic warfare concerns have been taken seriously, she commented quietly. So it appears, Steele replied, though I wonder how much of this was already planned versus a reaction to recent intelligence. Wright glanced at him. Either way, both our systems will be tested thoroughly. May the best technology prevail. It's not just about the technology, Colonel. It's about the philosophy behind it. Perhaps this exercise will determine which philosophy is correct. Steele shook his head slightly. Or perhaps it will show that neither approach is complete on its own. Before Wright could respond, a Navy lieutenant approached them. Colonel Steele, sir, there's a secure call for you at the communications center. Steele excused himself and followed the lieutenant through a series of corridors to a small room containing several secure communication terminals. After the lieutenant departed, closing the door behind him, Steele activated the encrypted line. Steele here. Iron, it's Morgan. The familiar voice of his intelligence contact came through clearly despite the encryption. We need to talk about what's happening at your location. I'm listening. The electronic warfare component that's been added to your exercise, it's not just a training evolution. Naval intelligence has detected unusual activity from a Chinese signals intelligence vessel operating near your exercise boundary. Steele felt his muscles tense. Define unusual activity. They're employing electronic systems we haven't seen before. Advanced signal collection and analysis capabilities that suggest they're not just observing, they're actively probing your defenses. To what end? That's the question, isn't it? Best case, they're gathering intelligence on our new systems. Worst case, they're preparing to test something of their own. Steele considered this information carefully. The ADN team reported an attempted intrusion before deployment. Could be related. Almost certainly, Morgan agreed. Our assessment is that they're particularly interested in autonomous systems like the ADN. Its decision architecture represents a significant intelligence target. What about the Sentinel? Less interest so far, possibly because it maintains human operators in the kill chain. Harder to compromise remotely. This confirms Steele's fundamental concern about fully autonomous systems, though he took no satisfaction in the validation. Is Admiral Reynolds aware of this? Yes, but he's under orders to proceed with the exercise regardless. There's a broader strategic calculation in play, demonstrating our capabilities while simultaneously assessing the Chinese response. Using us as bait, in other words. Morgan's voice took on a grim tone. Welcome to the new Cold War, Iron. It's being fought in the electromagnetic spectrum as much as in any physical domain. After the call ended, Steele remained in the communications room for several minutes, processing the implications. The exercise had just taken on an entirely new dimension, one that went beyond simple technology evaluation to active counterintelligence operations. When he finally emerged, night had fallen completely over the base. Lights from ships in the harbor reflected on the water, and the humid air carried the scent of salt and tropical vegetation. Steele made his way back to the secure facility, knowing his team would still be working to prepare the Sentinel for tomorrow's deployment. As expected, he found most of his team still there, making final adjustments to the system. Master Sergeant Wilkins looked up from a diagnostic panel as Steele approached. "Colonel, everything all right?" "We need to talk," Steele replied quietly. "Gather the senior team members." Minutes later, Steele stood in a small side room with his core team. Wilkins, Chief Engineer Chen, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and Sergeant First Class Dawson. All were veterans with multiple combat deployments. All had been personally selected by Steele for their combination of technical expertise and battlefield judgment. "What I'm about to share doesn't leave this room," Steele began, his voice low but intense. "The electronic warfare component of this exercise isn't just a training scenario. We have credible intelligence that Chinese assets are actively probing our defenses, with particular interest in the ADN system." Chen frowned. "Sir, if they're targeting the ADN, why are we concerned?" "Because if they succeed in compromising it during the exercise, it could have serious consequences beyond just embarrassing Colonel Wright. And because whatever they're using against the ADN today could be used against our systems tomorrow." Wilkins nodded slowly. "You think they might actually try to take control of the ADN during the exercise?" "I think we need to be prepared for that possibility, which is why I want to expand our electronic countermeasure capabilities beyond just protecting Sentinel." Rodriguez looked confused. "Sir, are you suggesting we protect the ADN system too?" "I'm suggesting we monitor it. If we detect anomalous signals targeting their system, we need to be prepared to intervene." Dawson, the team's electronic warfare specialist, leaned forward. "With respect, Colonel, that's walking a fine line. If Colonel Wright discovers we're monitoring her system, even for protective purposes—" "I'm not asking for her permission," Steele said firmly. "This is about ensuring the integrity of the entire exercise. If the Chinese are planning something, we need to be ready." The team exchanged glances, clearly processing the implications of what Steele was proposing. Finally, Wilkins spoke for all of them. "What do you need us to do, sir?" Steele outlined his plan, a passive monitoring system that would detect unusual electronic signals targeting either defense platform. If an active attack was detected, they would have options ranging from simple alert to electronic countermeasures. "We're not looking to interfere with the ADN's normal operations," Steele emphasized. "This is purely defensive." After the meeting concluded and his team returned to their work with new purpose, Steele found a quiet moment to stand outside the facility. The night air was thick with humidity, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled over the ocean. A storm was approaching, both literally and figuratively. The next morning dawned with gray skies and intermittent rain as tropical squalls moved across the island. Steele rose before sunrise, completing his physical therapy routine despite the cramped confines of his temporary quarters. The prosthetic leg required extra attention in the humid conditions, and he took time to ensure it was properly fitted and comfortable. After all these years, the routine had become second nature, though the phantom pain never entirely disappeared. By 06:30, he was at the secure facility, overseeing final preparations for the Sentinel's deployment. The system had been fully assembled and run through comprehensive diagnostic tests overnight. Now it was being loaded onto a heavy transport vehicle for movement to its initial position at Asan Beach. Across the facility, Wright's team was engaged in similar preparations with the ADN system. Steele noticed the ADN platform looked significantly different from the last time he'd seen it during the California tests. The design had evolved, becoming sleeker and more integrated, with less obvious external hardware. Wright approached as he was studying the changes. "We've made some modifications since the demonstration," she said, following his gaze. The new configuration reduces the radar cross-section and improves environmental resistance. Impressive, Steele acknowledged genuinely. Whatever his philosophical differences with Wright's approach, he respected good engineering. How has it affected the system's performance envelope? We've actually seen a 12% improvement in target acquisition time. The integrated processing nodes communicate more efficiently in this configuration. Steele nodded, noting that Wright seemed more open to discussing technical details than in previous interactions. Perhaps the shared circumstances, both of them far from home, facing the same challenges, had temporarily reduced the competitive tension between them. What about the electronic warfare hardening, he asked, testing how far this new openness extended. Wright's expression became more guarded. We've implemented additional safeguards based on the intelligence you shared. Beyond that, I'm not at liberty to discuss specific countermeasures. Fair enough, Steele conceded. He hadn't really expected more. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Mercer, the Navy officer assigned as their liaison for the exercise. Colonels, Mercer greeted them, we're ready to begin movement to your initial positions. The convoy will depart in 15 minutes. As the captain walked away, Wright turned back to Steele. Good luck today, Colonel. You too, Steele replied. May the best system prevail. Oh, it will, Wright said with a slight smile. And when it does, I hope you'll be open-minded enough to acknowledge it. With that, she returned to her team, leaving Steele to ponder her confidence. Wright truly believed in her system, not just as a technology, but as a vision of warfare's future. Her conviction was absolute, which made her formidable but also potentially blind to the ADN's inherent limitations. The convoy departed Naval Base Guam at precisely 0700, moving along rain-slicked coastal roads toward the designated exercise areas. Steele rode in a Humvee behind the heavy transport carrying the Sentinel, using the time to review the day's exercise scenarios on a secure tablet. The initial testing would be straightforward, a series of drone targets approaching from various vectors at different altitudes and speeds. Both the Sentinel and ADN systems would be evaluated on detection range, target acquisition time, and engagement accuracy. Later phases would introduce more complex scenarios, including multiple simultaneous targets and electronic countermeasures. As they approached Asen Beach, Steele could see naval vessels positioned offshore, destroyers and smaller patrol craft establishing a security perimeter for the exercise. Helicopters circled overhead, some carrying observation teams, others serving as part of the exercise control measures. The beach itself had been transformed into a military operations zone. Marine units had established defensive positions, simulating the amphibious landing that the Sentinel would be protecting. Their presence added realism to the scenario. In an actual combat situation, the Sentinel would be providing air defense for troops on the ground. The heavy transport carrying the Sentinel maneuvered carefully into position on a bluff overlooking the beach, providing optimal field of fire while maintaining cover from direct observation. Once in position, Steele's team quickly began the deployment sequence, extending stabilizing outriggers, powering up the system's radar and targeting computers, and performing final calibrations. Wilkins approached as Steele observed the preparations. System is green across all diagnostics, sir. We're ready to commence operations. And our special modifications? Online but passive. If we detect anything unusual, we'll have immediate alerts. Steele nodded, satisfied. Let's hope we don't need them. At precisely 0800, Exercise Control announced the commencement of operations. The first wave of target drones was launched from vessels offshore, flying predetermined patterns toward the simulated landing zone. The Sentinel's radar immediately detected the incoming targets, tracking their movement with precision. Inside the control unit, operators called out information as they prepared to engage. 3 targets detected, bearing 045, altitude 500 feet, speed 120 knots. Designating targets Alpha 1 through 3. Weapons free, engaging Alpha 1. The Sentinel's Gatling guns swiveled smoothly, tracking the lead drone. In a real engagement, it would have erupted with a devastating stream of 30mm projectiles. For this exercise, the system used laser designators and electronic signals to simulate weapons fire, while exercise controllers determined whether targets were destroyed based on tracking data. Alpha 1 engaged, hit confirmed. The operators worked with practiced efficiency, engaging each target in sequence. The Sentinel performed flawlessly, detecting and simulating the destruction of all 3 drones in the initial wave. Steele monitored the performance data on his tablet, noting that the system was operating well within expected parameters. The human operators were making quick, accurate decisions, demonstrating the value of their training and experience. After the first scenario concluded successfully, Steele stepped outside the control unit to observe the next phase. In the distance, he could see the ADN system positioned near Apra Harbor, its sleek profile distinctive even at range. According to the exercise plan, it would be facing similar challenges, though adapted for naval defense scenarios. Throughout the morning, both systems performed admirably against increasingly complex target presentations. The weather alternated between heavy tropical downpours and brief periods of clearing, adding environmental challenges to the technical ones. By midday, Steele felt cautiously optimistic. The Sentinel had successfully engaged all designated targets, demonstrating the effectiveness of its human-machine integration. Reports from exercise observers indicated that the ADN was performing equally well in its assigned scenarios. During a brief lull in operations, Steele received a call from Captain Mercer. "Colonel, Admiral Reynolds requests your presence for a midday assessment at the Mobile Command Center. Transport is en route to your position." Within 20 minutes, Steele was being driven to a temporary structure established on a ridge between the two exercise areas. The Mobile Command Center housed the senior officers overseeing the exercise, along with technical specialists monitoring both systems' performance. Inside, he found Admiral Reynolds studying a large tactical display showing the positions of all exercise participants. Colonel Wright arrived moments later, her uniform still pristine despite the challenging conditions. "Colonels," Reynolds greeted them, "initial assessments of both systems are positive. Your teams have performed well against the standard threat packages." "Thank you, Admiral," Wright responded. "The ADN has operated within expected parameters despite the adverse weather conditions." "The Sentinel team is similarly satisfied with our performance," Steele added. "The operators have demonstrated excellent judgment in target prioritization." Reynolds nodded, then gestured to a separate display showing a timeline. "This afternoon we'll be increasing the complexity significantly. Multiple simultaneous targets, higher speeds, and the introduction of electronic countermeasures." He turned to face them directly. "I wanted to speak with you both personally before this next phase. The electronic warfare component will be aggressive, more so than you might typically expect in an exercise environment." "May I ask why, Baron?" Reynolds exchanged glances with his intelligence officer before responding. "We have reason to believe our exercise is being closely monitored by interested parties. This presents an opportunity to evaluate how both your systems perform under realistic electromagnetic contest conditions." Steele understood the subtext immediately. The Admiral was confirming what Morgan had told him. They were deliberately creating conditions that would prompt Chinese electronic warfare assets to engage actively, using the exercise as a counterintelligence operation. "Are there specific threats you're anticipating, sir?" Steele asked carefully. "Let's just say we expect attempts to compromise targeting data, sensor feeds, and possibly command channels," Reynolds replied. "Both your systems have electronic warfare countermeasures. This afternoon we'll test their effectiveness thoroughly." As they left the command center, Wright fell into step beside Steele. "He's using us as bait," she said quietly. "It appears so. You don't seem surprised." Steele chose his words carefully. "Let's just say I've been in enough exercises to recognize when there's more happening than what's in the official briefing." Wright studied him for a moment. "You knew. That's why you were so insistent about electronic warfare hardening." "I had concerns based on intelligence about the Type 625E system." The Admiral confirmed those concerns are shared at higher levels. They reached the point where they would separate to return to their respective systems. Wright paused, her expression thoughtful. "If they target our systems this afternoon, they'll likely go after the ADN first. Its autonomous architecture presents a more attractive target for electronic subversion." Steele was surprised by her candor. "That's been my assessment as well. I've implemented additional safeguards, but..." She hesitated. "If you detect anything unusual targeting our system, I'd appreciate being informed immediately." "You have my word," Steele replied, not mentioning that he had already put measures in place to do exactly that. As he was driven back to the Sentinel's position, Steele reflected on this subtle shift in Wright's attitude. Her willingness to acknowledge the ADN's potential vulnerability suggested she was less blindly confident than he had assumed. Perhaps the reality of operating in a contested environment, far from the controlled conditions of a stateside demonstration, had introduced a healthy measure of caution. Upon returning to the Sentinel position, Steele gathered his core team for a briefing on the afternoon's operations. Admiral Reynolds has confirmed that we should expect aggressive electronic warfare tactics during the next phase. He informed them, our electronic countermeasure systems need to be fully active, and operators should be prepared for degraded information environments. Sergeant Dawson, the electronic warfare specialist, looked concerned. Sir, based on the passive monitoring we've been conducting, there are already unusual signals in the exercise area. Nothing directly targeting us yet, but definitely not part of the standard exercise package. Origin. Difficult to pinpoint precisely, but they're coming from the direction of the exercise boundary to the east, consistent with the reported position of Chinese vessels. Steele nodded grimly. They're warming up. When the exercise controllers initiate their electronic warfare scenarios this afternoon, it will provide cover for external actors to introduce their own measures. Should we alert exercise control? Lieutenant Rodriguez asked. They're already aware, Steele replied. In fact, they're counting on it. Our job is to ensure the Sentinel continues to function effectively regardless of the electromagnetic environment, and to gather as much intelligence as possible on any external electronic warfare signatures we encounter. As the team dispersed to prepare for the afternoon's challenges, Steele took a moment to stand atop the Sentinel's control unit, surveying the exercise area. The weather had cleared temporarily, providing visibility across the coastal region. In the distance, naval vessels maintained their positions offshore, while Marines continued their simulated operations on the beach below. It was an impressive display of military capability, deliberately staged for observers both acknowledged and unacknowledged. The public face of the exercise was about testing new air defense technologies. The reality, as was often the case in military operations, was considerably more complex. At 1400 hours, the afternoon phase of the exercise commenced with the launch of a new wave of target drones. These were more sophisticated than the morning's targets, faster with lower radar cross-sections and irregular flight patterns designed to complicate tracking. The Sentinel's operators responded with calm professionalism, adapting to the increased challenge. The system's radar strained to maintain lock on the stealthy targets, but the human operators compensated with predictive tracking, anticipating the drone's movements based on patterns they recognized from training and experience. 30 minutes into the scenario, the first electronic countermeasures appeared. The Sentinel's radar displays flickered momentarily as false returns appeared, creating ghost targets among the real ones. Almost simultaneously, Dawson reported detected jamming attempts against their communication channels. Standard Navy ECM package, he assessed initially. Nothing we haven't seen before. The operators adjusted accordingly, switching to alternate frequencies and applying filtering algorithms to distinguish genuine targets from electronic phantoms. The Sentinel continued to function effectively, though with reduced efficiency. Then, without warning, the situation changed dramatically. The Sentinel's targeting computer suddenly displayed a cascade of error messages, while the radar screen filled with false returns that appeared and disappeared randomly. This isn't the Navy ECM package, Dawson reported urgently. We're seeing attack patterns I've never encountered before. Multiple simultaneous approaches targeting different system vulnerabilities. Steele moved quickly to the electronic warfare station. Implement countermeasure protocol alpha. Switch to backup systems and isolate the primary targeting computer. The team responded with practiced efficiency, executing the contingency plans they had developed. The Sentinel's primary systems were temporarily taken offline and segregated, while backup systems engaged with limited capability. Sir, Wilkins called from the operator station, we're picking up similar attack patterns directed at the ADN position. Much higher intensity than what we're facing. Steele made an immediate decision. Notify Colonel Wright's team, send them the attack signature profiles we've identified. As the electronic battle intensified, Steele's team fought to maintain the Sentinel's operational capability while gathering intelligence on the attack methodologies. The sophisticated nature of the electronic assault confirmed Steele's suspicions. This was not merely an exercise scenario, but a genuine probing attack from an advanced adversary. The Sentinel's design philosophy proved advantageous in this environment. Because the system maintained human operators in the decision loop, it could function even with degraded automation. The operators reverted to manual targeting procedures, using optical sights and backup systems to maintain engagement capability, while the primary computers were isolated and protected. An hour into the electronic assault, Steele received an urgent call from the mobile command center. Colonel Steele, Admiral Reynolds' voice carried tension even through the secure line. We're seeing a significant escalation in electronic warfare activity across the exercise area. What's your system's status? The Sentinel is operational at approximately 60% capacity, Steele reported. We've isolated critical systems and reverted to manual operation where necessary. We're continuing to engage targets successfully despite the electronic interference. Good. Colonel Wright's team is reporting significant challenges. The ADN's autonomous decision architecture is struggling to function in this environment. Reynolds paused and Steele could hear voices conferring in the background. I'm implementing Contingency Delta. All exercise participants will receive updated instructions within 5 minutes. Contingency Delta. Steele recognized the code from the exercise directives. It indicated a shift from standard exercise protocols to a heightened security posture in response to external threats. Within minutes, all exercise participants received new orders. The simulated scenarios were suspended, replaced by a real-world security operation. Both the Sentinel and ADN systems were directed to establish a genuine air defense perimeter around Guam's critical infrastructure, while naval vessels moved to intercept positions facing eastward toward the reported location of Chinese vessels. As Steele's team reconfigured the Sentinel for actual defensive operations, reports came in of continued electronic attacks against both air defense systems. The ADN appeared to be suffering the greater impact, with its autonomous capabilities significantly degraded by the sophisticated jamming and intrusion attempts. Wright's voice came through on a direct channel to Steele. Colonel, we're experiencing a targeted attack against our command architecture. The system is rejecting external inputs, but it's also beginning to isolate from legitimate control channels. The concern in her voice was evident. The ADN's defensive protocols were working too well, treating all external signals, including legitimate commands, as potential threats. Can you implement a manual override? Steele asked. We're attempting to, but the system is designed to resist external manipulation during attack scenarios. That's normally a feature, not a bug. Steele understood immediately. The very autonomy that made the ADN theoretically superior in normal operations had become a critical vulnerability under these conditions. Without reliable human oversight, the system's self-protection protocols could effectively render it unusable. We've identified several of the attack vector signatures, Steele told her. I'm sending a technical team to your position to help implement targeted countermeasures. There was a brief silence before Wright responded. That would be appreciated, Colonel. The admission clearly cost her professionally, but Steele respected her willingness to prioritize operational effectiveness over pride. Within 20 minutes, Sergeant Dawson and 2 technical specialists had reached the ADN position with equipment specifically designed to counter the electronic attack patterns they had identified. Working alongside Wright's engineers, they began implementing targeted countermeasures to restore the ADN's functionality. Meanwhile, Steele received updated intelligence from Exercise Command. The electronic attacks had been traced to a Chinese intelligence vessel operating just beyond the international boundary east of Guam. The vessel had moved closer during the exercise, ostensibly conducting routine operations, while actually deploying sophisticated electronic warfare systems to probe the American defense platforms. As night fell over Guam, the situation had evolved into a real-world confrontation masquerading as an exercise. American P-8 Poseidon aircraft conducted aggressive reconnaissance flights near the Chinese vessel, while destroyers maneuvered to maintain a clear message of territorial enforcement. By 2100 hours, the electronic attacks had diminished significantly as the Chinese vessel increased its distance from the exercise area. Whether this withdrawal represented a successful completion of their intelligence gathering or a response to American counterpressure remained unclear. With the immediate crisis abating, Steele took the opportunity to visit the ADN position, where Dawson and Wright's team were completing their work to restore the system to full functionality. Wright met him outside the ADN's control center, her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely concealed frustration. Your team has been extremely helpful, Colonel, she acknowledged. We've managed to restore approximately 80% of the ADN's capabilities. Any permanent damage? Steele asked. No, but we've had to implement significant changes to the system's trust architecture. It will require a complete security review before being deployed operationally again. They walked a short distance away from the technical teams, finding a quiet spot where they could speak privately. You were right, Wright said finally, the admission clearly difficult for her. The autonomous architecture created vulnerabilities I hadn't fully anticipated. In a controlled environment, the system performs flawlessly. But out here, reality is messier than simulations, Steele offered. Yes, Wright looked toward the ocean where lights from naval vessels were visible on the horizon. The system responded exactly as designed. It protected itself from manipulation. The problem was that it couldn't distinguish between friendly inputs and hostile ones when the electronic environment became sufficiently confused. That's the fundamental challenge with removing humans from the decision loop, Steele said. Machines excel at executing defined protocols, but they struggle with ambiguity and contextual judgment. Wright nodded slowly. I still believe in the potential of autonomous systems, but today has been educational. Before Steele could respond, his secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Admiral Reynolds. Both commanding officers report to Mobile Command Center immediately. Priority Alpha. Within 30 minutes, Steele and Wright stood before Admiral Reynolds in the Command Center's secure briefing room. The Admiral's expression was grave as he activated a display showing satellite imagery of the South China Sea. Approximately 1 hour ago, we detected the launch of multiple unidentified aerial vehicles from Chinese naval vessels operating near the Spratly Islands, Reynolds began without preamble. Their flight path indicates they are headed toward Guam or the surrounding exercise area. The display showed predicted intercept tracks extending toward their position. What type of vehicles? Wright asked. Unknown, but they appear to be low observable drones with significant range capabilities. Given their launch parameters, they could be surveillance platforms or potentially something more concerning. Weapons capable? Steele inquired. We can't rule it out, Reynolds replied grimly. Which brings me to why I've called you here. The exercise has now been officially suspended, replaced by a real-world air defense operation. Both your systems are being integrated into Guam's defensive perimeter, effective immediately. Steele and Wright exchanged glances, understanding the significance of this development. Their experimental systems were being tasked with actual defense responsibilities, a rare occurrence for platforms still in the evaluation phase. Given what we experienced today, Reynolds continued, I'm implementing a modified command structure. Colonel Steele, your Sentinel system will be designated as the primary engagement platform due to its demonstrated resilience against electronic attack. Colonel Wright, Siran, the ADN will function in a supporting role, providing additional sensor coverage and target discrimination. Wright nodded, accepting the decision without protest. The day's events had clearly demonstrated the current limitations of her system. We'll need to establish joint protocols immediately, Steele said. If these drones are hostile, we can't afford any hesitation or confusion in the response. Agreed, Wright replied. I suggest we link our sensor networks but maintain separated engagement authorities. The Sentinel operators can make the final engagement decisions based on consolidated data from both systems. Steele was surprised by Wright's willingness to cede engagement authority, but recognized it as a pragmatic response to the day's demonstration of the ADN's vulnerabilities. Make it happen, Reynolds ordered. I want both systems fully integrated and operational within 2 hours. If those drones enter our air defense identification zone, I want options. As they left the command center to implement the new directives, Steele reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved in just 24 hours. What had begun as a technology demonstration had transformed into a real-world confrontation between great powers, with their experimental systems suddenly thrust into operational roles. The tropical night enveloped them as they walked to their waiting vehicles, the humid air heavy with the scent of rain and salt. Overhead, stars were visible between scattered clouds, the same stars that had guided mariners across the Pacific for centuries. The technology had changed beyond recognition, but the fundamental nature of military confrontation remained timeless, a test of will, capability, and judgment between adversaries. Tomorrow would bring a new challenge, potentially the first direct engagement with Chinese military systems in decades. The philosophical debate between human control and autonomy had suddenly become far more than an academic exercise or procurement decision. Now it would be tested in the real world, with genuine consequences. Steele felt the familiar calm that had always come to him before combat, a clarity of purpose that transcended fear or doubt. Whatever came next, he and his team would face it with the determination and adaptability that had defined his entire military career. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke overhead, unleashing sheets of tropical rain that pounded against the vehicles as they made their way back to their respective positions. In the darkness and downpour, the island of Guam transformed into a shadowy battlefield where the next chapter of great power competition was about to be written. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a glistening landscape as the first rays of sunlight broke over Guam's eastern horizon. Colonel James Steele stood outside the Sentinel's command unit, watching as the sky transitioned from deep indigo to pale blue. Despite operating on minimal sleep, his mind remained sharp, honed by decades of combat operations where rest was a luxury rarely afforded. Behind him, the Sentinel system had been transformed overnight. What had begun as an experimental platform for evaluation had become an integral part of Guam's air defense network. Engineers from the island's permanent military installations had worked through the night alongside Steele's team, integrating the Sentinel's targeting and tracking systems with the broader defensive infrastructure. Most significant was the newly established link with Wright's ADN platform. Following Admiral Reynolds' directives, they had created a hybrid system that combined the ADN's advanced sensor capabilities with the Sentinel's human-operated engagement protocols. It was an arrangement neither Steele nor Wright would have voluntarily chosen, but one that circumstances had forced upon them. Master Sergeant Wilkins approached, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "Surveillance flights have been up since 0400, sir. Still no visual confirmation of the inbound drones." Steele accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "What about radar tracking?" "Intermittent. They're flying a pattern designed to minimize detection, using the islands as cover and keeping their altitude extremely low. Best estimate puts them approximately 3 hours out, assuming they maintain current speed and heading." "And the Chinese vessel that launched them?" "It's withdrawn beyond the second island chain, maintaining position just inside international waters." Steele took a long sip of coffee, considering the implications. The Chinese were being careful to establish plausible deniability while still conducting what amounted to a provocative operation. By launching long-range drones from international waters and programming them to avoid direct confrontation until reaching their target, they created a situation where attribution would be difficult if challenged. "Any update from Admiral Reynolds?" "The diplomatic channels are active. Beijing is claiming the drones are conducting routine environmental research in international airspace." Steele snorted softly. "Environmental research that requires sophisticated electronic countermeasures and stealth technology." "Yes, sir. No one's buying it, but it gives them the fiction they need." A vehicle approached from the direction of the naval base, its tires kicking up spray from the puddles left by the night's rain. As it drew closer, Steele recognized it as Wright's transport. The vehicle stopped nearby, and Wright emerged, looking as though she too had managed little sleep. Despite this, her uniform remained impeccable, her bearing professional as she approached. "Colonel Steele, I thought I'd check the integration status personally." "We've completed the primary data links," Steele replied. "Your system's sensor feed is now displaying in our command unit. My operators are familiarizing themselves with the ADN's detection parameters." Wright nodded. "We've also established the redundant communications channels you requested. If the primary links are compromised, we should still maintain contact." They walked together toward the Sentinel's command unit, an unspoken truce in effect. The previous day's events had changed their relationship in subtle but significant ways. Wright's acknowledgement of the ADN's vulnerabilities had softened her earlier certainty about autonomous systems, while Steele had gained respect for her adaptability and professionalism in the face of setbacks. Inside the command unit, technicians from both teams worked side by side, making final adjustments to the integrated system. On the main display screen, data from both the Sentinel and ADN sensors created a comprehensive picture of the airspace surrounding Guam. The inbound drones appeared as faint, intermittent signatures, difficult to track but definitely approaching. "They're good," Wright commented, studying the display. "The flight profile suggests these aren't conventional drones. They're employing advanced autonomous navigation with minimal emissions." "Similar to your ADN philosophy," Steele observed. "Similar but with concerning differences," Wright admitted. "These appear designed specifically to evade detection rather than engage targets. The question is, what's their actual purpose? Surveillance, electronic intelligence gathering? Or delivery platforms for more sinister payloads," Steele added grimly. Wright didn't dispute this possibility. After yesterday's electronic attacks, the potential for more aggressive actions couldn't be dismissed. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Mercer, the Navy liaison officer. "Colonels, Admiral Reynolds has called an emergency briefing at 0800. Both of you are required to attend. The mobile command center had been expanded overnight, with additional communications equipment and staff brought in from Anderson Air Force Base. As Steele and Wright entered, they found the space buzzing with activity. Intelligence officers huddled around satellite imagery displays, while communications specialists coordinated with naval vessels patrolling the waters around Guam. Admiral Reynolds stood at the center of this controlled chaos, his weathered face reflecting the gravity of the situation. When he spotted Steele and Wright, he gestured for them to join him in a side room equipped with secure communications equipment. "The situation has escalated," Reynolds began without preamble once the door closed behind them. "Overnight, we detected additional drone launches from Chinese vessels operating near the paracels. These appear to be a different configuration from the first group, with potential weapons capabilities." He activated a display showing satellite imagery of Chinese naval vessels. Furthermore, a People's Liberation Army Navy destroyer group has changed course and is now proceeding in this direction at high speed. While still hundreds of miles away, their movement represents a significant change in posture. "They're reinforcing the drone operation," Steele assessed. "That's our interpretation as well," Reynolds confirmed. "Which brings me to why I've called you here. The integrated air defense system you have established has become the centerpiece of our immediate response options. I need to know with absolute certainty what capabilities you can bring to bear if these drones enter territorial airspace." Wright spoke first. "The ADN sensor suite is now operating at approximately 90% capacity. We've isolated the systems that were compromised yesterday and implemented additional security protocols. However, I've restricted its autonomous engagement capabilities as a precaution." She glanced at Steele before continuing. "Given yesterday's experience, I concur with the decision to route final engagement authority through the Sentinel's human operators." Reynolds nodded, then turned to Steele. "Colonel, the Sentinel is fully operational, sir. With the additional sensor data from the ADN, our targeting capabilities have actually been enhanced. The human operators can process the combined information stream effectively and make engagement decisions with confidence. And if the electronic attacks resume, we've implemented the countermeasures that proved effective yesterday. More importantly, the hybrid approach gives us redundancy. If either system is compromised, the other can maintain defensive capabilities." Reynolds studied both officers for a moment, then came to a decision. "Very well. As of this moment, I'm designating your integrated system as our primary response option for the inbound drones. Rules of engagement are as follows. Any unidentified aircraft entering Guam's territorial airspace without clearance is subject to immediate engagement. Within the broader air defense identification zone, you are authorized to conduct aggressive challenges and take defensive measures if those challenges are not answered appropriately." He paused, making sure they understood the significance of these orders. "Make no mistake, this is no longer an exercise. We are facing a deliberate provocation designed to test our capabilities and resolve. How we respond will have strategic implications beyond this immediate situation." After the briefing concluded, Steele and Wright walked together back to their vehicles. "He didn't exaggerate the stakes," Wright said quietly. "If those drones are armed and we engage them, it could trigger a broader confrontation. And if they're armed and we don't engage them, the consequences could be worse," Steele replied. "Either way, decisions made in the next few hours could shape U.S.-China relations for years to come." Wright nodded, her expression somber. "Not exactly what we expected when we came to demonstrate air defense systems." "That's the nature of military service," Steele said. "You train for one scenario and find yourself facing another entirely. The key is adaptability." As they reached their vehicles, Wright paused. "For what it's worth, Colonel, I'm glad you're the one making the engagement decisions today. Your experience is valuable in this situation." The admission clearly cost her professionally, but Steele appreciated its significance. Coming from someone who had championed removing human judgment from combat decisions, it represented a meaningful evolution in thinking. "Thank you, Colonel. Let's hope that experience isn't needed, but if it is, we'll be ready." Back at the Sentinel position, Steele found his team had been reinforced with additional personnel from Guam's permanent air defense units. Marine Corps security elements had also been deployed around the perimeter, establishing defensive positions that transformed the once experimental site into a hardened military installation. Inside the command unit, Steele gathered his core team for a final briefing before the inbound drones reached detection range. "The situation has changed significantly," he began. "What started as a technology demonstration has become a real-world air defense operation with potential strategic implications. I need everyone operating at peak efficiency. He turned to the operations team. Our engagement protocols have been updated. Admiral Reynolds has authorized immediate action against any unidentified aircraft entering territorial airspace. Within the ADIZ, we challenge first and engage only if the challenge is not appropriately answered. Next, he addressed the electronic warfare specialists. Yesterday's attacks were likely just a prelude. Be prepared for more sophisticated measures as these drones approach. Our priority is maintaining system integrity and accurate targeting. Finally, he looked at each team member individually. What we do today matters beyond just this immediate situation. Our actions will demonstrate American resolve and capability in this region. Remember your training, trust your judgment, and we'll get through this together. The team dispersed to their stations, their movements reflecting the calm professionalism that came from years of training and preparation. Despite the unprecedented nature of the situation, they approached their duties with methodical focus. Steele moved to the main operations console, where Lieutenant Rodriguez was monitoring the integrated sensor display. The ADN's data feed had enhanced their tracking capabilities significantly, providing detailed atmospheric and electromagnetic information that complemented the Sentinel's own sensors. Status of the inbound targets? Steele asked. Still approximately 90 minutes out, sir. They've maintained their approach pattern, using the islands for cover when possible. We're getting better tracking now with the combined sensor data. Numbers? Confirmed 6 in the first wave. The second launch that Admiral Reynolds mentioned hasn't appeared on our scopes yet, but they would still be beyond our maximum detection range. Steele studied the tactical display, noting the positions of American naval and air assets deployed to intercept the drones if necessary. 2 destroyers had positioned themselves along the likely approach vector, while F-35 fighters from Anderson Air Force Base maintained combat air patrol overhead. His secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from his son Michael, serving aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, battle group on station 300 miles east, launching additional air patrols. Stay safe, Dad. The aircraft carrier's presence represented a significant escalation in American military posture. If the Lincoln battle group was moving into position, the situation was being taken extremely seriously at the highest levels. As the morning progressed, tension mounted in the command unit. The inbound drones continued their approach, now visible as consistent tracks on the tactical display as they came within range of Guam's permanent radar installations. Their flight pattern remained evasive, suggesting sophisticated programming designed to minimize detection. Wright arrived at the Sentinel position shortly before the drones were expected to reach the outer boundary of the Air Defense Identification Zone. She had transferred operational control of the ADN to the Integrated Command System, maintaining only a technical supervision role. We're getting enhanced imagery from a reconnaissance aircraft, she reported, showing Steele a tablet with high-resolution photographs. These aren't any standard drone configuration we've encountered before. The images showed sleek, dark aircraft with unusual geometric shapes clearly designed to minimize radar cross-section. Their size was difficult to determine without reference points, but they appeared substantial enough to carry significant payloads. Customized platforms, Steele assessed, probably built specifically for this operation, which suggests considerable investment in planning, Wright added. This isn't an improvised provocation. Before Steele could respond, an alert sounded from the sensor station. Sir, the drones have accelerated. New estimated arrival at the ADA's boundary in 15 minutes. The sudden change in behavior indicated they had either detected the American surveillance or had reached a predetermined point in their mission profile. Either way, the confrontation was imminent. Alert Admiral Reynolds, Steele ordered, and prepare challenge protocols. The next quarter hour passed with tense efficiency as the command unit prepared for the approaching engagement. Communication channels were verified, weapon systems checked one final time, and rules of engagement reviewed with all operators. Targets approaching ADI's boundary, announced the tracking officer. ETA 2 minutes. Initiate challenge, Steele ordered. The communications officer transmitted on international emergency frequencies. Unidentified aircraft approaching Guam Air Defense Identification Zone. You are required to identify yourselves and state your intentions immediately. Failure to comply will result in defensive measures. The message was repeated 3 times with no response from the approaching drones. No acknowledgement, sir, the communications officer reported. They're maintaining course and speed. Deploy warning aircraft, Steele directed. Two F-35s broke from their patrol pattern, accelerating toward the incoming drones in a show of force designed to communicate American resolve without direct engagement. On the tactical display, the fighters appeared as friendly indicators moving rapidly toward the unidentified contacts. As they approached, the pilots reported visual confirmation of the drones, describing them as black, delta-wing platforms approximately the size of small fighter aircraft. Then, without warning, the situation escalated dramatically. "Sir, the drones have dispersed and accelerated," called the sensor operator. "They're executing evasive maneuvers." On the display, the previously orderly formation of drones suddenly scattered in multiple directions, their speed increasing significantly. F-35 pilots report the drones have deployed some kind of countermeasure, the communications officer relayed. They're experiencing targeting system interference. Simultaneously, alerts began sounding throughout the command unit as electronic warfare specialists detected familiar signatures. "Electronic attack detected," Sergeant Dawson reported urgently. "Similar pattern to yesterday, but significantly more powerful. They're targeting our communication and targeting systems." The integrated display flickered as the electronic countermeasures took effect, creating momentary gaps in the sensor coverage. Wright moved to Dawson's station, working alongside him to implement the defensive measures they had developed following the previous day's attack. "Two drones have altered course directly toward Guam territorial airspace," reported the tracking officer. "The others are maintaining position just outside the ADZ, continuing electronic emissions." The strategy became immediately clear to Steele. The main drone group was providing electronic cover while two platforms attempted to penetrate Guam's airspace, likely to gather intelligence on defensive responses. "Admiral Reynolds on Secure Line 1, sir," the communications officer announced. Steele took the call. "Steele here." "Colonel, you're seeing this?" Reynolds' voice was tense but controlled. "Yes, sir. Two penetrators with electronic support from the main group. Classic reconnaissance in force. Concur with your assessment. Remember your rules of engagement. Any penetration of territorial airspace authorizes immediate engagement." "Understood, sir." The moment of decision approached rapidly as the two drones continued their course toward Guam's 12-mile territorial limit. The F-35s had positioned themselves to intercept but were experiencing difficulties with their targeting systems due to the electronic interference. "Targets will cross into territorial airspace in 60 seconds, announced the tracking officer. Steele made his decision. Designate the lead penetrators as Hostile 1 and 2. Prepare Sentinel for engagement. The targeting officers activated the Sentinel's weapon systems, swiveling the platform to track the approaching drones. Unlike the previous day's exercises, this would involve actual weapon release rather than simulated engagement. 40 seconds to territorial boundary. Wright moved to stand beside Steele, her expression grim but resolved. "The ADN sensors are maintaining lock despite the interference. We're feeding targeting data directly to your systems." 30 seconds. "Weapons ready, sir," reported Master Sergeant Wilkins. "Awaiting your command." 20 seconds. The command unit fell silent except for the steady countdown and the low hum of equipment. Every person present understood the gravity of what was about to occur. Potentially the first direct engagement between American and Chinese military systems in decades. 10 seconds. "Targets crossing territorial boundary now." "Engage Hostile 1 and 2, Steele ordered, his voice calm and definitive. The Sentinel's Gatling gun erupted with a deafening roar, sending a stream of 30-millimeter projectiles toward the lead drone. Simultaneously, a missile launched from the system with a sharp whoosh, leaving a trail of white smoke as it accelerated toward the second target. On the tactical display, they watched as the Gatling gun stream connected with Hostile 1. The drone attempted evasive maneuvers but couldn't outpace the weapon's tracking ability. Multiple hits were confirmed, and the drone's signature began to break up on radar as it lost structural integrity. The missile pursuit of Hostile 2 was more prolonged. The drone deployed countermeasures attempting to confuse the missile's guidance system. For several tense seconds, the outcome remained uncertain as the missile adjusted its course repeatedly. "Impact," called the weapons officer as the missile finally found its target. "Hostile 2 confirmed destroyed." The remaining drones in the main group immediately altered course, turning away from Guam and accelerating to maximum speed. Their electronic emissions ceased abruptly, suggesting a programmed response to the engagement of their companion platforms. "All hostile targets are withdrawing, sir," reported the tracking officer, maintaining surveillance. The command unit erupted in controlled activity as reports were compiled and transmitted to higher headquarters. Within minutes, Admiral Reynolds was on the secure line again. "Clean engagement, Colonel," he said, approval evident in his tone. "Both targets confirmed destroyed within territorial airspace. All actions well within rules of engagement." "Thank you, sir. The integrated system performed effectively." "Indeed it did. Stand by for further developments. Beijing will respond to this one way or another." After the call ended, Steele turned to find Wright studying the sensor recordings of the engagement. "The hybrid approach worked," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "The ADN provided superior target discrimination, while your operators made the engagement decisions. It was more effective than either system would have been independently." "Different strengths combined appropriately," Steele replied, "technology enhancing human judgment rather than replacing it." Wright nodded slowly. "Perhaps there's a middle ground I hadn't fully considered." Before Steele could respond, new alerts sounded from the communication station. "Sir, Indopacom reports multiple vessel launches from the Chinese destroyer group. They appear to be the second drone wave Admiral Reynolds mentioned earlier. The tactical display updated to show the new threat. At least 12 additional drones launching from vessels still hundreds of miles away, but clearly responding to the engagement. They're accelerating to supersonic speed," reported the sensor operator. "Estimated arrival in Guam airspace in approximately 45 minutes. Steele quickly assessed the situation. "This is an escalation. The first wave was probing our defenses. This appears to be a more determined effort." Admiral Reynolds came on the command channel without waiting for a call. "All units, we have confirmed multiple supersonic platforms inbound. These are assessed as potentially weapons capable based on their flight profile. All air defense systems are authorized to engage upon territorial airspace violation. Fighter squadrons are launching now to establish outer defensive perimeter." The next 30 minutes passed in intense preparation as additional defensive assets were brought to bear. The integrated Sentinel ADN system was repositioned to provide optimal coverage of the most likely approach vectors, while Marine units reinforced the physical security around the installation. "Colonel," Master Sergeant Wilkins approached with a concerned expression, "we're detecting unusual signals from the approaching platforms, different from the first wave." Steele moved to the electronic warfare station, where Sergeant Dawson was analyzing the emissions. "It's a more sophisticated package," Dawson explained, pointing to waveform displays. "The signatures suggest these platforms are equipped with advanced electronic attack capabilities, possibly including directed energy components." "Directed energy?" Wright had overheard and joined them. "That would represent a significant capability leap." Dawson nodded. "If these readings are correct, these platforms could potentially disable electronic systems without traditional jamming, more like targeted EMP effects." The implications were immediately clear. Such capabilities could render even hardened military electronics temporarily inoperable, creating brief but critical windows of vulnerability. "We need to implement maximum electromagnetic protection protocols," Steele ordered, "and prepare for potential operation under degraded electronic conditions." The defensive preparations continued with renewed urgency as the inbound threats drew closer. From Anderson Air Force Base, additional fighter aircraft launched to intercept the drones before they reached Guam. Navy vessels repositioned to provide supplementary air defense coverage with their Aegis systems. As the response escalated, Steele received an unexpected call on his secure line. The caller ID showed a Pentagon number. "Colonel Steele, this is Secretary of Defense Harrington. I've been briefed on your situation there." Steele straightened instinctively, though the secretary couldn't see him. "Yes, Mr. Secretary. The President has been informed of the engagement in the approaching second wave. This has become a matter of national security concern at the highest levels." "Understood, sir. Admiral Reynolds has operational authority, but I wanted to communicate directly that your actions have full support from Washington. The Chinese have crossed a line with this provocation, and we're responding diplomatically as well as militarily." "Thank you for the information, sir. One more thing, Colonel. We've received intelligence that the second wave drones may be equipped with more than just reconnaissance capabilities. Proceed with maximum caution." After the call ended, Steele immediately relayed this information to Admiral Reynolds, who confirmed similar intelligence had reached him through military channels. "The diplomatic channels are active," Reynolds informed him. "Beijing is claiming the first drones strayed accidentally into territorial airspace due to programming errors, and that we overreacted by destroying them." "And the supersonic platforms heading our way now?" Steele asked. They're characterizing those as routine exercises unrelated to the earlier incident. Obviously, we're not accepting that explanation. The situation had clearly escalated to a level of brinkmanship not seen in the region for decades. What had begun as a test of new defense technologies had become a critical moment in great power competition, with both nations moving military assets and exchanging increasingly tense diplomatic messages. 30 minutes to potential intercept, announced the tracking officer. F-35s will make first contact in approximately 15 minutes. Wright approached Steele, her tablet displaying new analysis of the inbound drones. We've been processing the sensor data. These appear to be based on the same platform as the Type 625E's missile component, but significantly modified for extended range and speed, which means they're familiar with the electronic architecture, Steele concluded. Any vulnerabilities in the ADN they identified yesterday could potentially be exploited by these platforms. Wright nodded grimly. I've implemented additional isolation protocols, but we should assume they'll attempt to compromise our systems again. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent call from the fighter intercept group. The F-35s had made visual contact with the incoming drones and confirmed they were larger than the first wave, with visible weapons pylons. They're armed, Steele said, the confirmation adding new gravity to the situation. This is no longer just a provocation. It's a direct threat. Admiral Reynolds came on the command channel immediately. All units, we have confirmation of armed hostile platforms approaching territorial airspace. Rules of engagement are updated. You are authorized to engage these threats upon reaching the ADIZ's boundary. I repeat, weapons free upon ADIZ's penetration. This represented a significant escalation in the rules of engagement. Previously, they had been authorized to engage only upon territorial airspace violation. Now the larger defensive zone surrounding Guam was being treated as the engagement boundary, reflecting the increased threat assessment. Sir, Wilkins reported, the F-35s are moving to engage the lead drones now. On the tactical display, they watched as the American fighters closed with the incoming threats. The engagement occurred beyond visual range from Guam, but the sensor data painted a clear picture of what transpired. The fighters launched air-to-air missiles at the lead drones, scoring several hits. However, the remaining drones executed a complex dispersal pattern, simultaneously releasing what appeared to be smaller submunitions. Multiple new contacts, called the sensor operator. The drones have deployed some kind of secondary platforms. The tactical picture became suddenly more complex as dozens of smaller signatures appeared, spreading out in a pattern designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer numbers. It's a swarm configuration, Wright assessed quickly. The larger platforms are motherships deploying smaller autonomous drones. This was a scenario they had theorized but never encountered in actual operations. A tiered drone attack with larger platforms deploying swarms of smaller weapons to saturate defenses. F-35s engaging the secondary platforms, but there are too many for complete interdiction, reported the communications officer. Estimate 60% will penetrate the outer defensive screen. Steele made an immediate decision. Reconfigure the integrated system for multiple target engagement. The Sentinel's Gatling gun has the best capability against small, fast targets. The approaching swarm represented exactly the kind of threat the Sentinel had been designed to counter. Multiple, relatively unsophisticated platforms that could overwhelm conventional air defenses through numbers rather than sophistication. As the defensive preparations intensified, a new warning came from the electronic warfare station. Massive electronic attack detected. Multiple frequencies, coordinated pattern. The command unit's displays flickered and distorted as the electronic attack took effect. This was far more powerful than the previous day's probing efforts, a determined attempt to blind Guam's defensive systems before the drone swarm arrived. Implementing countermeasures, Dawson reported, his fingers flying across his console. But this is significantly more sophisticated than yesterday. Wright moved to assist, redirecting the ADN's processing power to analyze and counter the electronic attack patterns. For several tense minutes, they fought an invisible battle in the electromagnetic spectrum, trying to maintain their system's integrity against the onslaught. Partial success, Wright announced finally. We've isolated critical systems and established clean data paths for targeting, but we've lost approximately 30% of our sensor coverage. Steele nodded, quickly adapting to the degraded information environment. Prioritize the approach corridors. Focus remaining sensor capacity on the most likely attack vectors. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of naval gunfire as ships in the harbor began engaging the closest drones with their point defense systems. The aerial battle was now extending directly over Guam as the remaining swarm elements penetrated the outer defenses. Multiple targets entering engagement range, reported the weapons officer. Sentinel tracking system has lock on the 12 closest threats. Engage, Steele ordered. The Sentinel's Gatling gun roared to life, tracking and firing in rapid succession as it shifted between targets. The 30mm rounds shredded the small drones, which lacked the armor or countermeasures to survive direct hits. On the tactical display, friendly icons representing other air defense systems around the island showed similar engagements as Guam's multi-layered defenses responded to the attack. Patriot missile batteries engaged the higher altitude threats, while close-in weapon systems dealt with those that penetrated to lower altitudes. For nearly 10 minutes, the battle raged as wave after wave of the small drones attempted to penetrate Guam's defenses. The Sentinel performed admirably, destroying dozens of the threats, while the ADN sensors, despite the electronic attack, continued to provide critical targeting data that compensated for the degraded radar environment. Gradually, the attack began to diminish as the drone reserves were depleted. The surviving mothership platforms turned away, accelerating back toward their launch vessels, while the remaining swarm elements were systematically eliminated by the island's defenses. All targets neutralized or withdrawing, announced the tracking officer finally. No penetration of critical infrastructure defensive perimeters. A collective exhalation seemed to pass through the command unit as the immediate threats subsided. The engagement had been intense but successful. Guam's defenses had held against what amounted to the first drone swarm attack ever employed in a near-peer military confrontation. Admiral Reynolds' voice came through on the command channel, his tone reflecting controlled triumph. All units, outstanding performance. Initial assessment shows 0 casualties and minimal damage to non-critical infrastructure. The integrated air defense system performed exceptionally. After acknowledging the Admiral's message, Steele turned to find Wright studying the performance data from their integrated system. The combination worked better than either of us could have anticipated, she said, scrolling through engagement statistics. The ADN sensor suite provided superior target discrimination, while the Sentinel's human operators made the critical prioritization decisions that prevented any penetration of key areas. Steele nodded. Neither philosophy was entirely right or wrong. The technology and the human element both proved essential. Wright looked up from her tablet. This will change the procurement discussion completely. Instead of choosing between automated and human-operated systems, the data clearly supports a hybrid approach. Before Steele could respond, Admiral Reynolds arrived personally at the command unit, his staff car pulling up outside with minimal ceremony. As he entered, everyone snapped to attention. "As you were," he said, moving directly to where Steele and Wright stood. "Colonels, I've just concluded a secure call with the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense. They've reviewed the preliminary engagement data and are extremely impressed with the performance of your integrated system." He looked between them with undisguised approval. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond the technical success. The strategic implications are significant. The Chinese tested our capabilities and resolve, and both held firm." "What's the diplomatic situation, sir?" Steele asked. "Beijing has gone suddenly quiet," Reynolds replied. "They've withdrawn their naval vessels to beyond the second island chain and ceased the aggressive electronic activities. Our assessment is that they're reassessing their approach based on the effectiveness of our response." He paused, then continued with a hint of satisfaction. "In other words, we pushed back harder, and now they're reconsidering the wisdom of further escalation." Wright spoke up. "And the integrated defense system, sir? What happens next with that?" "That's actually why I'm here," Reynolds replied. "The Secretary of Defense has authorized an immediate joint development program based on your work here. Instead of choosing between the Sentinel and ADN approaches, they want to pursue a hybrid system that incorporates the strengths of both." He turned to Steele. "Colonel, you're being appointed as the military lead for this program. Your experience and judgment during this crisis demonstrated exactly why the human element remains essential in combat systems." Then to Wright. "And Colonel Wright, you'll serve as technical director, focusing on how to optimize the autonomous capabilities within a human-supervised framework. Your willingness to adapt your approach based on operational realities impressed a lot of people at the Pentagon." Both officers acknowledged their new assignments with professional composure, though Steele noted a hint of satisfaction in Wright's expression that mirrored his own. Their philosophical debate had evolved into an unexpected collaboration, proving more effective than either approach alone. The crisis appears contained for now, Reynolds concluded, but the lessons learned here will shape our defense capabilities for decades to come. Well done, both of you. After the Admiral departed, Steele stepped outside the command unit, needing a moment to process the events of the past 48 hours. The sun was beginning to set over the ocean, casting long shadows across Guam's western shore. Naval vessels continued their patrol patterns offshore, while aircraft occasionally passed overhead, maintaining vigilance despite the apparent resolution. Wright joined him after a few minutes, her tablet set aside for once. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "So," she said finally, "co-directors of the new hybrid defense program." "Apparently so," Steele replied, "not what either of us expected when we arrived on this island. Life rarely follows the expected path, especially in our profession." Wright turned to face him directly. "I want you to know that I've reconsidered some of my fundamental assumptions about autonomous systems. Not abandoned them, but evolved my thinking." "As have I," Steele acknowledged. "The technology is more capable than I gave it credit for. The key is finding the right balance, the right integration points between human judgment and machine efficiency." "A partnership rather than a replacement," Wright suggested. "Exactly." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young officer from the communications center. "Colonel Steele, sir, there's a secure call for you from the USS Abraham Lincoln. Lieutenant Steele is requesting to speak with you." Steele excused himself and went to take the call. His son's voice came through clearly on the secure line. "Dad, we just got word about what happened there. Hell of a day." "That it was," Steele agreed, unable to suppress a smile at hearing Michael's voice. "Your battle group provided good support from the eastern approach. Made a difference knowing you were out there. The whole carrier wing was ready to launch if needed. Glad it didn't come to that." Michael paused. "Mom called. She saw something on the news about incidents near Guam and figured you were in the middle of it somehow." "Your mother always did have good intuition," Steele chuckled. "Tell her I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "Will do. Hey, they're saying the Lincoln might make a port call at Guam next week as part of the continued presence mission. Might actually get to see you in person." "I'd like that," Steele replied, realizing how much he meant it. "A lot has happened here. Good things. Unexpected things." After finishing the call, Steele returned to find Wright organizing the technical teams for the transition to their new joint program. The integrated command unit had already begun to evolve from an emergency lash-up to the prototype for a new generation of defense systems. "Everything all right?" Wright asked when she noticed his return. "Yes, family checking in." He gestured to the activity around them. "You're getting a head start on the program. No time like the present. The data from today's engagement provides an exceptional foundation for the hybrid architecture." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what to call the new system." "And?" "Iron Sentinel," she said with a slight smile, "combining elements of both our approaches into something stronger than either alone." Steele nodded, appreciating the symbolism. "Iron Sentinel it is." As night fell over Guam, the integrated team continued their work, no longer divided by philosophical differences, but united by shared experience and a common purpose. The crisis had tested both their systems and their convictions, forcing each to recognize the value in the other's approach. The new hybrid system would represent not just a technological evolution, but a philosophical one as well, acknowledging that in the complex realm of modern warfare, neither human judgment nor artificial intelligence alone was sufficient. The true path forward lay in their thoughtful integration, combining the wisdom of experience with the precision of technology. For Colonel James "Iron" Steele, it was a fitting culmination to a lifetime of service. The principles he had championed throughout his career had not been rejected but refined, evolving to meet new challenges while preserving the core values he had always defended. As he watched the teams working together seamlessly, he felt a profound satisfaction in knowing that whatever conflicts might come, the defense of American forces would still depend on the uniquely human qualities of judgment, adaptability, and moral clarity, enhanced rather than replaced by the technologies of the future. The Iron Sentinel would stand as testament to that enduring truth, a guardian combining the best of humanity and technology to face whatever challenges might emerge on the horizon of tomorrow's battlefields.